Excited to welcome Ryerson University women's basketball head coach Carly Clarke to the podcast. This past season, Carly Clarke took home her first U Sports Coach of the Year award, doing so on the heels of a dominant showing in the competition on their way to a conference regular season title, a conference tournament title, and a national championship to cap an undefeated season. The accolades and success are just the latest in what has been a triumphant stretch for Clarke, as she also served as the Canadian national senior women's team assistant coach at the Tokyo Games this past summer. Clarke has been head coach at Ryerson since 2012 and part of Canadian national team programming for the last 10 years. She has won 2 OUA conference championships and 5 Final 8 national championship appearances in 9 years. Internationally, she's been head coach for 2 world championship medals and been part of a number of staffs that have won medals. Carly, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, coming off a national championship, there's no better time, and congrats on that. And give us some perspective, because what a unique kind of couple of years that you've gone through, and all Canadian coaches who've coached college basketball have gone through, in terms of a COVID year, losing a whole year basically. And then, prior to that, you had it rolling. So it must have been interesting to try and get it back going again.
Yeah, I mean, I think for everyone across the world, it's been a pretty wild couple of years, and certainly in sport and in the Canadian sports system in particular, and the university system. 2020, if you roll back to March 2020, we got our national championship tournament in our Final 8 about 5 days before things shut down. So, we were fortunate to finish our season. It did not finish for us as we had hoped, and through injury and whatnot, we lost in national quarterfinal, and and then things shut down, and our team was really in a spot where we were veteran and looking forward to the next season, and then everything stopped. So we spent time trying to remain optimistic through the uncertainty, staying connected as a team, and ultimately in the fall, I guess, or late summer of 2020, our season was canceled. And certainly in Toronto, where we're located, things were the hardest in a lot of ways, as through end of 2020 through to 21, we were locked down for like 7 straight months with no access to gym or facilities. So to get back at it and have the season we had this season, again through a lot of ups and downs, it was just so nice to be back out there.
And you mentioned to me privately, so I'd love for you to address it, just some of the takeaways from that experience that actually in the end probably ended up helping you and helping the program. And can you talk about some of those things coming out of that losing a whole season type of experience and then the whole COVID years?
Yeah, well, I think we've heard, again, everyone speak about it in different spaces. There was no book to read on how to handle a pandemic, right, in any profession. So trial and error with a lot of different things, but one thing that was our priority for our program is just the well-being of our people, and really taking some time to check in, make sure they had what they needed, and support them through the different scenarios. The university age athlete, is that time of their life is, whether you're an athlete or not, is so transformative, and it's such an important social time in life, and for all of those things to be ripped away, and then to have sport ripped away, I think there's lots of different emotions that were dealt with. So, for us, we decided to dive into that well-being, dive into the mental performance side of things. And I think we really, really built a strong foundation and developed relationships to a deeper level that we were able to carry forward to this season.
I've mentioned it many times on the podcast, just, the problem with, mental performance, mental skills, all this different stuff is often it's separated from the actual team experience. And I know something that you talk about is that it got integrated within your team experience. Can you talk about some of the tangible things that you did to integrate mental performance into your team?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in the mental performance side of things. Even for myself as a coach, I have different strategies and routines that I utilize. And, for us, there's so much you can do with your off-court time to, talk about how to build confidence and communication and self-talk and all of those different things. But, often what gets lost is how to utilize those skills in the high pressure moments. So we're really fortunate to have an incredible mental performance coach with us this season. And she was at practice 2 to 3 times a week, was at games as much as possible. And, one example that in a way that we used her was start of and end of every practice that she was present at, we would incorporate breathing. So simple strategy of just literally practicing our breathing. And then, it was my job as a coach to now integrate, hey, we're making mistakes, we're too sped up in practice, those types of things are happening. Now's the time to use your breath. Now's the time to use it in response to a mistake, or utilize your self-talk or your cue words, and making sure there's connection between, those off-court exercises and touch points they would have with her as our mental performance coach. And I think, me seeing the value and applying it in those situations.
That's such a great example of integration and application in a practical way. Now, would she be that when she was there, would she cue you as well and cue the players with different types of, whatever pre-designed coping strategies or different things that you have in place?
Definitely. Her role was, on the sideline, she's observing, but she also has the freedom to touch base and prompt the reminders. And, one of the important roles I think of a mental performance coach is there's a level of confidentiality and safety that the athletes have, to have some one-on-one conversations. And, I would not always be privy to like the depth of those one-on-one conversations. So her freedom to be able to remind and for them to have a safe space to work through some things that they may not always want to share with a coach is important. So yeah, the role in practice would fluctuate. There might be a moment where she'd come up to me in practice and say, I'm observing this, potentially try and integrate, whatever, the breathing, the self-talk, the reminder of our communication, any area really. And, or even sometimes observing my stress or the way I was maybe interacting with athletes that could help them be better. So we tried to have the spaces open and two-way communication as much as possible.
I love this. And, one of my challenges was always balancing what I knew to be good with psychological safety and creating that, but also balancing that with competitive intensity, which sometimes got the best of me. So I'm wondering, anything particular stand out for you in terms of strategies for yourself to be able to balance those things? Because clearly your team competed at a really high level while you still managed this psychological safety and this well-being of the athlete.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that we emphasize on a daily basis to try and create those environments. Every drill that we're utilizing in practice, there's a competition element. We're keeping score. There's a winner or a loser. There's an outcome that we're trying to achieve. And we try and make sure we build that in with great clarity, but it's also connected to our process. So it's not just about winning, but it's the process of, a defensive shell drill as an example of like if you've got to keep the basketball out of the paint, no offensive rebounds, no scores, no strong hand drives. And that's how you get a stop. So there's a lot of process elements to it, not just stop or score. So, those types of things created the competitive environment. And the athletes ultimately become the ones where like, no, there was paint there. There was a strong hand drive and they're the ones driving that. So our communication and the way we build drills and different aspects of our practice, I think, build the competitiveness, but also we try and open that space again for the athletes to recognize and create a freedom to challenge those situations and awareness of those situations. And, beyond that, we try and encourage errors in the right way. And, we'll celebrate when things go right. Bring awareness to when the errors are made, but not in a way that, there's a fear to make the error again. We want to try and correct the error and understand why we view that as an error and what our, desired outcome is to be and what we're giving up or not giving up as an example.
Please dive deeper for us on that, celebrating errors, because that may seem like a misnomer to a lot of coaches when they think about traditional coaching. So can you go deeper with that?
Yeah, I think we just try and be as specific as we can be in the feedback. Our team this year was exceptional defensively. I think over the last 2 years, we spent a lot of time on really building some clarity of what we were trying to do defensively. And sometimes later in a possession, our athletes might get into a point of, like who should have rotated here? I had the drop, who had the next? They get into those types of conversations, and we'll often like back that up and say, okay, like what led to that level of confusion? If we correct this spot, then we won't get into that situation later in the possession. But then at the same time, being able to say like, okay, we just got blown by, but we got blown by to weekend, which is what we want right now. And then now we'll get better at the closeout the next time. So that's like, part of the process. And now let's add to that next step.
So you talked about clarity defensively, but I know clarity in general is a big thing in your program. And you talk about the importance of language. Can you explain how you share that language and reach clarity with language within your program?
Yeah, I think, again, spend a lot of time and reflecting and growing, after every season. And I'm really passionate about that as certainly a person, as a coach. It's my job to make sure that I'm getting better if that's the expectation of our athletes. I think through different debrief processes, we would integrate new ideas or new concepts, and there's so much in there these days that like you come across a new idea and say like, oh, I want to try that. Or I found myself being a little bit too guilty of mixing things up too often, or using different phrases, or I was calling something one thing and another assistant coach was calling it something else. So we had some direct conversations as a staff to really clarify if this is our language in this situation. And it became my job early on to correct our coaches the right language. And then we got to the point where the athletes knew, like, we don't need a long stop, a long explanation. It's like, hit the snap back, hit the short roll, whatever it is, and be able to communicate that quickly and clearly situations in practice or in games. And the short, concise things that the athletes would be triggered by were really helpful.
That's great. And at least people think, most small colleges and certainly most universities in Canada do not have full-time staffs, much like high school coaches or whatnot. So that communication part becomes even more important because they're not full-time there with you often. And that's a big thing. Coach, you mentioned strong hand, weak hand. So, and your defense was tremendous, coaches. I encourage you to go watch some of their possessions defensively. Super aggressive too. Seem to be part of the philosophy, but can you just focus in a little bit? What were some of the challenges in getting your players to be able to run this type of force weak or don't allow strong hand type of defense?
Yeah, so I think the first biggest challenge for us was just the one-on-one element, in that we always emphasized one-on-one, but we weren't necessarily super clear with exactly what we wanted that plan to be. And, we really built the defense by starting and playing a lot of one-on-one and getting players to understand angles and positioning and, where to align your chest and your feet based on the offensive player. And, a lot of weekend defenses is sending everything left. And, over time, we certainly started that way, but then over time, we were seeing more left-handed players. So we began to challenge ourselves of, okay, how do we deal with the lefties? And, again, changing our body position on the ball one-on-one. And, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is the players will figure it out if you spend some time on it, that they are smart and you can challenge them to close out to specific personnel and have awareness of who they're closing out to on the floor. I think we underestimate sometimes what the players are capable of. And then the second challenge, I think more from a team perspective in building the weekend defense is really about defending in ball screen. And, for us, when we started to dictate things left or right and not just left all the time, our coverages changed a little bit. And, figuring that out with 2 or 3 player actions now instead of 1 player, that takes some time to communicate and make sure there's clarity in what that process should look like.
Let's jump into the ball screen stuff, because again, traditionally with a lot of these type of defenses, if the ball handler is dribbling to their strong hand, then it'd be a hedge or a shock. And if they're going to the baseline, you force them obviously to an ice in terms of their weak hand to the baseline. So is that similar, or did you just do different things for different personnel?
For us, again, it's evolved over time. So it started, just one side of the floor. On the right side of the floor, we were doing a lot of shocking or hard hedging. Mm-hmm. just trying to be as disruptive as possible. In the middle of the floor, it varied a little bit, over, under, but really just trying to continue to get it going weak. And I think that was the biggest piece, was getting over it, and get the ball going in the right direction when you were getting over the screen, so it couldn't come back to the strong hand. And we did do some icing on the weak side of the floor as well. But over time, we tried to mix things up a little bit more. Again, as the players got smarter, we did incorporate a little bit more switching, a little bit of trapping, and that just became part of our package to be able to be a little bit less predictable.
I love that. And adding the switching and trapping in particular, I think is really valuable, because I found, like, especially on the top ball screen, if we're forcing weak, we were almost, again, especially in a drop or a less aggressive coverage, a player would inevitably snake it and get back to their dominant hand. And to me, that didn't make sense. Even though we were forcing it weak initially, we were having to deal with the strong hand. So I imagine going to some of the switching and more aggressive coverages helped eliminate that possibility.
Definitely. I think the other thing that we're seeing more and more of against this type of defense too is a lot of rescreening, which leaves you out of position, or some of your tags are out of position, single side, double side, and we certainly spent some time breaking some of those aspects down as well.
And I'm curious then, you talked about one-on-one as building your defense. And I think that's such an important part nowadays to think about that. If you want to be good covering the ball, start with one-on-one and build from there. Did you use different types of dynamic starts, different types of constraints to be able to help shape, your players' understanding of what you wanted to do out of one-on-one?
Definitely. And, I think we do some version of one-on-one or two-on-two almost every single day in practice. We were a full court pickup, variety of full court pressure teams. So, some days and early in the season, it would start in the full court scenarios and just trying to influence the ball, in different places in the backcourt, because I think that part can sometimes be overlooked. We did do some stationary one-on-one just in terms of like figuring out feet and body position. And then, a lot of short closeout. We try and defend in a way where we're not in long closeout situations, and we've got a lot of short closeouts. And so whether that was one-on-one or a little like pen and kick 2-on-2 to create those situations, we spent a lot of time with that.
I think that's so important, because I think coaches make a mistake sometimes with these closeout drills, that it's always such a long closeout, and that's unrealistic, right? And if you're playing good defense, and mostly the defense that you want to play, most of them are short closeouts. So you're actually creating those situations for your players to work on what they need to transfer to the game.
Yeah, exactly. Again, we talk about what we're willing to give up or trying to give up and then get to on a short closeout. So, we'll break down small elements of those situations and then put them into 4-on-4 and 5-on-5 scenarios. And, when we do get into those long closeout situations, we try and unpack why that happened, because there's probably a breakdown before that is an area that we need to be better in.
Well, you guys were also excellent in the half court offensively, per synergy. And, I watched a bunch of clips to get ready for this. And one thing I noticed is obviously a lot of movement prior to generally falling into ball screen or types of get actions, but particularly a lot of pitch handoff actions. So can you talk about that, the movement prior to the action that you guys incorporated? Because it seemed like, again, it just caused havoc for the defense.
Yeah, again, a couple of years ago, and I think even more depth through COVID, we really evaluated like who our people are and what their strengths were, and really tried to build our offense around putting our players in positions to utilize their strengths. And one of the gifts of our team this year is we often had 5 players on the floor that could shoot the 3, or we had a lot of versatility where we could based on matchups or based on different strengths, move people to different spots on the floor. So we've used a lot of 5-out actions and tried to get some players on the move in order to, get some shooters open, but also in order to create some space for just dynamic play. And, we spent a lot of time on reads of, handoffs, rescreens, slips, ghosts, and really experimented with a lot of those things. And our players just really got good at linking of those different concepts together. And, we would mix up how we were defending those actions to give ourselves different reads to unpack as well.
Well, and the other thing that stood out is the off the ball cutting, whether it was cutting on drive, second cuts, or it's cutting on post ups. I mean, your players off the ball especially seem to have a great instinct and seem to be able to take advantage of that quite often. So can you talk a little bit about that, but also how you work on that and develop that? Because I think, again, that's a characteristic of modern offense nowadays.
Yeah, I think there was 2 or 3 different elements to that for us. Is, the first one, again, we talked about what the strengths of each individual were. So, if our starting 5 player was one of the best 3-point shooters in the country. So when she's at that position, she has far more freedom. She can pop 75% of the time. But when our other players are, ball screening, then they know that, their role is to now roll, short roll, long roll, whatever it is, the majority of the time. And then other players can read and react off those situations. We also had some perimeter players, or based on our spacing, they'd be on the perimeter and they're not great shooters. And, opponents would become aware of that, and they're not going to close out all the way to them if they catch the ball. So we started to really unpack what they can do in those situations and where those cutting opportunities are. So, a lot of personnel based in that space. But then also we talked about reading. So if we're setting we ran a lot of step up this year, and again, like a step up with our 3-point shooting threat at the 5, she's a pop threat. So the next defender is really looking to stunt hard. We talked about, that defender over helping. Well, now you're a cutter. Now you're, they turn their head, back cut, pin in, flare, and again, just working on those reads and the cues that you would see to create a space, put some pressure on a defender and force them into a decision, and obviously cut for yourself to get open, but how that's also creating something for someone else.
Can you take us in some of those conversations and give us an idea of how you have those conversations with your players to be able to define for them their strengths? Because clearly that's a huge part of coaching nowadays, especially with some conceptual offense that you throw out there. So let's say you're pick and pop big. 75% of the time, I know that's a general number, but you want her to pop. How do you take us into that conversation about how you get her to buy into that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of them are happening amongst the whole team, and, live play situations, or even like, I guess, between possessions, we'll stop it and say, like, hey, what did you see? And, this is where the D is. We'll talk about it. This is how you can get an open shot for you. This is how, when our wing player, when you cut, you're creating this open shot for this person. And, one of the things that was most special about our team this year was just the level of selflessness. There was a level of connection about what we were trying to do, and everyone was committed to the same goal. And we would really try and celebrate, again, that cut created her open shot. Like, great job. That's what we need more of, and recognize those little things. That the shot going in is the easy thing to recognize, but like, how did we get that open shot? So re-emphasizing amongst the whole team, you're great at this, keep doing this. And, I think that creates some validation and some confidence when they do things right. And then it gives opportunities to, unpack what other decisions may have been available when there are other decisions out there.
It's great stuff. It's awesome to hear. And particularly this focus on personnel and understanding, their value to their teammates into the offense. And another example would be out of transition, where you seem to have a lot of triggers. And let's say an example of one of your players, I could tell, is almost always a point guard push as deep as possible type of player, whereas another player handling the ball is probably more of an angle to a handoff to initiate the action type of player. So take us in that process a little bit of your triggers on offense, especially out of transition.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent some time on that in a couple different ways. We spent some time with 2-sided actions early in the year, and again, knowing some of our shooting threats, we really wanted to space the floor and put pressure on defense, especially like we weren't the biggest team. So, if transition defenses are recovering to the paint, how do we punish that with a lot of spacing? And then, to your point, giving room for those guards to push and attack the paint, and then make decisions where it was one of their strengths. So, simply we would just do a lot of general spacing, talk about that, and give them freedom to play out of advantage drills. We spend 15 minutes every practice of, whether it's like 3-on-3 continuous or, different advantage situations in transition, and just exploring what we can find out there. We'll say, okay, today let's hunt handoffs, let's hunt drag screens, or, look for the trail or get to the second side. And, sometimes it's based on the opponent and what we might anticipate, or just throwing different ideas out there for the players to experiment with and build on those throughout the course of the year.
Well, you already referenced figure it out, and that's a part of this constraints-led approach where you give them a constraint and then they have to figure it out. Are there any types of musts or non-negotiables within your offense or your defense for your players that are things that, again, they must adhere to?
Offensively, there truly is a lot of freedom. I think, we talk about spacing constantly. I think every possession, whether it's related to the cutting or, like getting to the spots we want to get on the floor, so we have good spacing to make decisions. It's not always black and white, but that's a concept that, we always want them thinking about. And, we're trying to stay out of, well, I'll call it the gray zone, and getting caught, in between spaces. And then defensively, like the one-on-one piece is massive for us. And, it may sound really general, but our effort is something that is just non-negotiable for us, is that we don't quit on plays. We play through possessions. We talk about playing the whistle and not the horn all the time. And just some of those little things effort wise. And, along that same line is just mistake response, and understanding that, you're going to make a mistake, but we try not to compound mistakes. And I think that's what leads to runs in our sport, is that, if you make a mistake and then you shut down for next possession or two, that goes from a 2-point run to a 6-point run. And, so less tactical in some of those hard non-negotiables, but those are messages that we get to our team all the time.
Right. And those are so important. And mistake response. So connect that a little bit to us with, the integration of a sports psychologist or a mental skills coach, and then the individual performance plan of a player, is that these things are very individual to players, aren't they, in terms of how they respond to mistakes? So can you take us in that, maybe give us 2 examples of 2 different players and how they respond and need to cope differently with mistakes?
Yeah, I think that's such a great one, and such an important one that, I think we've grown a lot in this year in particular, to your point with the mental performance coach, is I think just awareness of what athletes need. And, we've got one athlete who can be really low confidence, and she's not a great shooter. So if she misses an outside shot or two because she's left open, that can lead to a head hanging or, a lot of self-doubt, and maybe she doesn't play with the same effort defensively. So that might just be a touch point of, a pat on the back of like, that's the right shot. That's the one we want you to shoot. This is what else you can do in this situation. Whereas another athlete, might respond more with a level of frustration, and, that leads to extra effort at the other end, and, a proneness to shoot a gap or, reach in and foul and attempt to make up for their error. So that might indicate like, use your breathing, keep your composure, again, utilizing some keywords that we might have to get the mental mindset reset as quickly as possible.
It's very cool to hear that. And another thing that you referenced for me, just as we were getting ready for this, was your approach in combining both game prep and team development and practice. And I think that's such a cool concept too, to be able to talk about and share with us. So can you outline that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think some of that goes back to, even 2 seasons ago when we were reevaluating some of what we were doing technically and tactically. One of the scans that we did was, okay, we know our team is pretty good, and, we're on the cusp of, competing. We've been at those national championships. What do we need to do to take ourselves over the top? And I think we looked at, 3 or 4 of the top anticipated teams in the country that season. They said, who do they have? What are their strengths? What are we going to need to do to beat them? And our team didn't know that we did that, but our staff did that. And that, helped to build our technical and tactical plan for that season. And that's something that, we've certainly carried forward this past year as well. So, obviously starting more broadly, but one example of that is, our team was a bit smaller than some of the other top teams in the country. So how are we going to handle when the ball goes into the post? So we had some tactics that we just started practicing at the beginning of the year, and 2 or 3 different things that we knew we were going to do to try and handle post play as an example. And then when we get into finding those opponents, or those opponents are approaching, now we decide what we're going to use, what's our plan A, what's our plan B. So that, again, that's one example, but also in relation to the practice planning, game planning process in some other ways is looking how we're going to be defended. For example, we saw a variety of different ball screen defenses this season. So, building in those small-sided games where today we're switching and, we're blitzing, we're, mixing up those different coverages and working on those reads. And oftentimes we wouldn't even tell our team early on that it was a plan or, preparation for an opponent. It was just working on a variety of things. And through that, we were able to build in different wrinkles and different reads. And then as you get closer to your game, to be able to say, okay, we anticipate the defense is going to do this. These are some of the reads we want to look for, and get more specific as the games will get closer.
It's awesome because it speaks to the value that you put into defensive decision-making and building defensive decision-making. I think we often think of defense too much as absolutes rather than decision-making. But as you know, the best defenses have to be adaptable. So these small-sided games, these disadvantaged games for the defense, what are some other ways you incorporated defensive decision-making? You mentioned the constraints as well, just having 2 different constraints to be able to go to. Anything else?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we do is just like recognizing who you're in an action with. So we had a lot of similar sized players. Our 2, 3, 4, and even sometimes our 5 would be all switchable. So we might just say we're switching 2 through 5. But any action with the 1, that's not a switch. So we're in our base coverage, and then we'll just again, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, different situations, and the players have to recognize and communicate in live play. This one's a switch, this one's not a switch. And, again, our team was super intelligent this season in particular. So now we're able to get into the specifics. Are we switching under? Are we switching over? Sometimes we were able to incorporate some scram switching to get out of some matchups. And again, I think just challenging and introducing some of these concepts, and again, they can figure it out if you give them some freedom to do it.
Well, and they have to figure it out to win a national championship. There's no doubt. They're not all scripted situations, as we know. And part of the value of practicing small-sided games, constraint-led approach, offense versus defense, whatever you want to call it, is that it gives you this opportunity to be able to, I believe, game plan more effectively, right? Like you can integrate more of the wrinkles or adjustments for opponents because they're used to being able to adapt and adjust within your practices.
Totally. And I think, certainly down the stretch of our season this year, that was a big piece. And a lot of our offense was built around, specific spacing. Like a lot of our actions were set up with similar spacing, or a couple different like base alignments, I'll say. And as the season went on, we were able to just add 1 or 2 little wrinkles that were out of actions that we had been doing all year. So they were easy adds, and just enough to, I think, like throw the opponent off that, would have scouted something specifically. The freedom to play and make plays, I think, is so critical. At every level, the best teams are taking things away, but also at the same time to have, something that you can get to where you get the ball to your best player's hands to make a decision. There's such a balance between those 2 things. And, through our buildup, we were able to get to some of those places, and our players really understood we're running this for so-and-so on the left wing because her strength is, driving baseline on the left wing. And they understood how those things kind of set up and all linked together.
And you mentioned culture and the importance of that. One of the things that you reference as well is team identity. And I'm curious, first of all, if you could share what your team identity was for this season, and then we can dive a little bit more into it.
Yeah, I think broadly, the first part of it was just our goal was to be the best at getting better. And that is what we talked about every single day, of how to find a way to get a little bit better every day. And, we are really fortunate to have great depth on our team this year. And that meant no matter what two teams we had made up in practice, that they were competing and challenging each other. And, certainly celebrating that competition level was a huge part of our identity. The second piece was, this season in particular, coming out of everything that we came out of, our identity was having fun. It's, again, sounds simple, but we talked about joy and gratitude constantly. We had a few start stops due to, the virus peaking again. And, it was tough waiting it out to get back to it. So we just had, again, joy and gratitude of having the opportunity, and I think really appreciating each other and the team that we had. So, those were certainly massive pieces. And, there was then a process focus and a relentlessness that we just talked about nonstop, and, relentless in getting better, in managing those mistake responses and playing every single possession. And, a bit of a joke amongst our team right now, but truly one of my favorite moments is there's 1 minute left in the national final, and we were up by 20 at that point. And, one of our best players is on the floor, and you can see her looking around and saying, like, one more stop. So, at that point, you probably could have started to relax a little bit, but that was not the mindset. So, for me, that was one of the most rewarding moments to see, that process live through to the very end.
It's amazing. Those type of moments bring you so much pride as a coach, don't you? Because that they have all bought in together, as you said, to that selflessness.
Absolutely.
So when you form this team identity, Coach, is that something you're doing, co-creating it with your players? Or is this something that you're coming in, understanding your team, and then this is what it is?
Yeah, I think it's varied a little bit for me over the years. I think it depends a bit on where, what the status of your team is. For us this season, our team was very veteran. So, two seasons ago in 2019-20, we spent some time together as a team of really, putting some words and some clear actions together of what that identity was. And so much of our team carried forward from that season 2 years ago that we didn't feel we needed to spend the same amount of time, off court unpacking it. And we were able to carry some of it forward. And we had real strong leadership to build it on the floor and what it looked like. And we talked about those joy and gratitude and relentlessness, but it also related to, it could then filter down to what that looked like on the floor, and the players could communicate that, like diving on the floor for the loose ball was relentless. And we would use our language in those situations, and, celebrating the pass situation and making sure we highlighted that, and our team would be celebrating that before the shot was made or missed, because it was the right play. So again, I think, how much time you spend unpacking those things is a bit on where your team is and understanding what that identity should look like in live play.
Coach, I can't have you on the podcast and not go back to a little bit of your origin story, because again, we know where you are now. You're at the top of the mountain, obviously incredible success internationally at Ryerson, but your first university job was a huge struggle. You were at a place that was under-resourced, wasn't really there to compete per se, and not a knock on them. That's just how it goes at some places, but it was a real struggle, wasn't it? And I want to just kind of have you share a little bit part of that process of working your way through that. And, obviously it ended in a great story, but, that's part of your journey, isn't it?
No question. I look back on those years and absolutely recognize how formative they were for me as a coach. When I started, I was first hired as a head coach when I was 26 years old. And now across our league, it's not common in the NCAA, but it is common in the NCAA. It's only becoming more common in youth sports to have full-time assistant coaches. When I was coming up, that opportunity did not exist. So if you wanted,
I never had one in my whole career.
Exactly. So So I had the opportunity to get my first head coaching position at 26 at the University of Prince Edward Island, and that program was in a complete rebuild. And I think that's why they took a chance on a young head coach. And I'll never forget my university coach telling me, "You don't know how much you don't know until you're in it." And I certainly lived that. And as I went through it, I think I didn't always know it at the time how much I was learning, but our team for the first 2 seasons, we did not win a regular season game. We went 0-20 and 0-20. And we did have some success recruiting. Our second year, my second year there, we had a very young team with some promising talent, but we still didn't win a regular season game. And I think when you're going through that, and you're a competitor, it's really, really hard. And there was definitely some hard moments. But as a coach, you have to find wins. And I think that, I've always been a believer in the process, but going through those leaner years really drove my focus on the process, because that's the only way we could stick to it, is recognizing, the wins that we were having that weren't necessarily showing up on the scoreboard every single day. So, I think that was critical in building my coaching philosophy as a young coach, and carrying that forward to the opportunity at Ryerson to continue building that. And I think that lives through in how we approach our team now.
I had a great coaching mentor when I was really young, before I got my first university job. And they told me that for me to really grow as a coach, I'd have to go through losing to really experience what coaching is about. And my first university job was very similar to what you went through. And those struggles really do obviously make you a better coach. And it also gives you a little bit of freedom, doesn't it? To be able to try some things that maybe you otherwise wouldn't, because you have to throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks.
No question. I think the experimentation that you get in those situations is also really important. I think we see that with Nick Nurse, talks about that all the time through his journey in different countries and whatnot. And you figure out what works in different situations, and that's part of the fun of it all too, right?
Absolutely. It's certainly somewhat fun to have no pressure, knowing that you probably can't win, but also that you can try anything and then see. And very unique, I know. Very different than what you're experiencing now, right?
Totally. And I think once you get a taste of the winning, that's a driving force moving forward. And but again, to integrate all of those different elements into building a successful program, I'm just a full believer in that. And again, the process and the experimentation, and not allowing yourself to get stagnant either.
Right, because that is the challenge of winning, is that it's working. So we don't need to change anything. And you've referenced that, but that was another advantage of the COVID shutdowns for you, no doubt, is that you got a chance to do some things otherwise that you wouldn't be able to do, which is immerse yourself in learning, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of opportunities that were out there, I mean, not live, but through this forum and whatnot, to connect with different coaches around the world. Again, there was almost too much information out there, and to actually spend the time then paring it down, and I think figure out what fits best for your team and your program is an important part of that process too.
How has coaching internationally shaped you? Because again, you've had some tremendous experiences, both as a head coach and as an assistant coach internationally.
I think, I've just been so fortunate to be exposed to, basketball worldwide, to be exposed to different styles, different coaches, and every type of learning opportunity available. So I just feel so fortunate for that. But the uniqueness of the different styles around the world has been something that, has really challenged me, certainly in a world championship tournament, to go from playing Russia in a world championship semifinal to Japan in a world championship bronze medal game. Those styles are immensely different, and challenges your adaptability and your decision making. And when you're going to a world championship, you've got 7 games in 11 days of all those different styles. So as a staff, to be able to go, okay, we've got 3 weeks to figure out how to prepare for all of these things, what's going to work. I think I'm giving some specific examples of the type of adaptability, efficiency that you have to have in your training and in your planning in order to to build a successful, situation in those tournaments. And, to have two different environments to bring things back and forth between and experiment with different things, again, is, I think there's no better place to learn and grow.
It's kind of alluring too. Like you watch a team like Japan play on the women's side and you go, man, I'd love to have my team play that way. But it puts it in perspective how unique their situation and their players and their culture, and reference personnel so much throughout this. And it's like, as much as I want my team to play that way, I probably don't have a team that can play that way. And that's challenging, isn't it? Somewhat.
Totally. It totally is. We actually took a couple pieces from Japan, but we're not running Japan style at our university, where, this is an element that fits with this personnel. And, again, it just challenges your thinking and, forces you to think outside the box a little bit too.
Carly, man, there's so many wonderful things. I'm so grateful. Finally, we've had this chat. We've got to know each other a little bit separate from this, but, the thing that stands out for me is the build of what you've done at Ryerson. And I think there's a lot of lessons to take away from that, because again, tremendous support. You got there at the same time when the university was ready to do it. But by and large, you still had to put all these pieces in place progressively to get to the top. This wasn't an overnight thing. So you can talk about some of the things to coaches about just some of the faith process that you went through as you're building this.
Yeah, I think that the first thing, the reason I was drawn to Ryerson, now Toronto Metropolitan University, there was a vision for excellence, and the university was making a shift in their value for athletics. And I just felt like I aligned with the excellence that they were striving for. And that was really attractive to me. So to know that we had the support from the university to build a program the right way, I think that was an incredibly important foundational piece. And then I think that the biggest thing for me was just surrounding myself with the right people, from our coaching staff to, the types of players who are incredible people that I get to work with every day. I think, over the 10 years that I've been at Ryerson, we've just had incredible people that have challenged me to grow, that have brought their best and contributed to a vision and put the work in. So I think those two pieces, the environment for excellence with the right people, you can find a lot of success.
And you did. And you did. Congratulations, Coach, on another amazing year. And thanks for sharing the game with us.
Thanks so much for having me.